Welcome into a Swamp 247 commit breakdown. My name's Jacob Rudner alongside Swamp 247 recruiting analyst Blake Alderman. And Blake, it's been a while since we've done one of these, taking a look at Florida's recent commitments. They got two today, one from safety Bryce Thornton out of the state of Georgia, and another from another safety, in-state Dijon Johnson commits to the Gators, former Ohio State commit, jumps into the Gators class. This is a big day for Florida, brings them back into the top 10 nationally. In 2023 recruiting at number 8. They were down to number 12 after some other teams grabbed a couple players. And this is just kind of one of those things you and I had been talking about in our recent podcast, which people can check out, that this is an opportunity to kind of climb. It's a great defensive back class for the school. What are your reactions to the dual commitments today for the Gators?
Yeah, these guys were both leans to Florida for quite some time. Bryce Thornton had taken several visits to Florida since the spring. Is seen as a guy that obviously will play safety with his height and frame. I think that he's a guy that I think is suited also for the nickel, which is an area where Florida wanted to shore up some of these guys. You pair him with a guy like Sharif Denson, who's already in the class. Some other guys that are versatile enough to play in that nickel role. So I think that's a good fit there. Thornton is a guy that has moved around in the secondary at the high school level. Even with Johnson, he's listed as a safety on 24/7 Sports. I think he's another guy that's versatile. I think he's someone that can play safety, can play nickel, can even go outside and play corner. You've seen him match up against some of the best guys in the country, whether that be at the high school level, whether that be any camps. He was at the Feature 50 camp in the state of Florida that they held back in the summer, held his own there, playing some outside corner. So Florida has really made it a point to try to build up that defensive back class. You pair the two that they landed today in Bryce Thornton and Dijon Johnson with some of those other guys they have in the class already. And you can see that was an area of focus for Florida. They've done a great job, mission accomplished so far. At this point, you continue to put all your eggs in the 5-star Cormani McLean basket, the 5-star cornerback out of Lakeland, Florida. He's kind of the bow on top of this present. He's the last kind of piece of that puzzle for Florida going forward. Expected to make a decision much later, but you look at what Corey Raymond, Patrick Toney, and other staff members on Florida staff have done. Tip of the cap to those guys, because the haul that they put together so far is really good, and it's really going to shore up that depth in that room going forward, to that position going forward for them.
And we'll zoom out on that a little bit more in a second here. But first, I want to look at these commitments specifically. Let's start with the most recent one, Dijon Johnson, who committed later in the day. Johnson is a superstar prospect, 96 overall, as you see on the screen. Number 7 among safeties, which is something I want to talk about with you, and 21 in the state of Florida on that 24/7 Sports composite. Blake, this is a guy, like you said, who's a versatile defensive back. He's a long dude. Extremely athletic. My first question to you is, where does he profile? Has been a cornerback in the rankings, now moved to safety, like you said. Where do you see this one settling? What's his future?
I think that's hard to predict right now, and I think that is just because the simple fact of I think he's someone where you get him on campus and you see where he fits best. You kind of try that out through trial and error. I think corner could make some sense. I personally, I think he's best suited as safety. That's me. That's where I would put him at. But I also realize that this is a guy that has been a really good player at the cornerback position at the high school level. I think he could definitely fit in that role. I think it's just one of those situations to where Florida figures that out. Once they're able to get him on campus, once they're able to work him out, practice with him, kind of put him through, that trial by fire that those freshman players get, whether it's spring, whether it's the fall season and fall camp there. So I think he's probably a little bit more tricky to predict than a Bryce Thornton, because I think he's a safety nickel all the way. I think that's where he fits in there. If it was me, I think that Dijon fits best at that safety position, but I wouldn't count out him being a guy that could play some corner, whether that's long-term, whether that's something that they try out, like I said, through practices and, different things of that nature. But, that's why if I was grouping him up, I would obviously keep Bryce as a safety. I would consider him that. Dijon, I would just call him a flat defensive back. And I say that because I think he can play all of those positions at a very high level.
Physically speaking, where is he at right now in terms of being ready to play that safety position? I know it's obviously calls for a different body profile than would a cornerback. Is he somebody that's ready to potentially join a college safety group? Is there room in terms of having to fill him out more? What are the Gators getting in that regard?
With Johnson, 6'1", 190 coming in, a 4.5 40-yard dash guy. I think that as far as safety, you'd want to fill out his frame a little bit more. And I would say that just for being in the tackle, coming down and helping in the run game, fill him out there. But, that's trick of the trade whenever you're, bringing these guys in the college level. You get them in there in the strength and conditioning on the nutrition plan that they have. It's
Right.
pretty easy to bulk up and, it's easy to, have these guys like modeling clay and, do whatever you want, whether that's add weight, take off weight, depending on the position. I think from an athletic standpoint and from a frame standpoint, I think he's a guy that could see the field early. Florida's obviously, bringing in a lot of defensive backs. They've done a good job at, some safeties in the 2022 cycle. I think that as far as, is he ready to make major steps as a freshman? Probably not. But I think that he's a guy that can certainly be in that rotation.
Let's look at the other safety prospect that the Gators landed today, Bryce Thornton, out of Georgia, ranked number 485 overall, 45 among safeties, and 46 in his state. Blake, this is a prospect that the Gators have had their eye on for quite some time. He's somebody, despite his 3-star ranking, who has received attention from the National Blue Bloods. Tell us what the Gators are getting in a prospect like Thornton, and maybe is he a little more advanced than his ranking might suggest?
I would say so. I think he's a guy that was around the ball a lot as a junior, really capitalized on that. Whenever he, had those attempts to, snatch the ball out of the air, he did that. I think he's a guy that, when you look at Florida, they've done a good job with turnovers this season. The defense obviously isn't a perfect product and nowhere near close to that. But you see the turnovers they've created. You can see that that's what they want to do at that next level, just like every other defense out there. You want to go get the ball. You want to turn it over. You want to give it back to your offense's hands. But with Thornton, I think you've got a guy that is a ball hawk. He's the one that's going to try to go get the ball. He's physical despite his smaller frame that he's got. So I think that, he's a guy that, yes, he's ranked a 3-star, but, you look at the offers, you look at the schools that were courting him, where he's visited, where his options were. And I think that, with Alabama, they had quite a few safeties in the fold there, but they were still recruiting him. And I think the fact that you already pretty much have your safety class done if you're Alabama, but yet you're still recruiting a guy like Bryce Thornton, you're still bringing him in. Alabama didn't have to bring him in on an official visit. They could have very well just been like, we're good, we're full. They still continue to do their homework on there. Obviously, that's what good, coaches and good, programs do. They continue to do their due diligence. But, the fact that Alabama continue to do their homework on him, I think speaks a lot of his game. And I think that, again, Florida wanted to continue to attack the ball in the air. And I think Thornton is one of those guys that can fit that bill really well.
Well, there you go. Florida lands 2 safety prospects, both of whom have quite a bit of promise. Dijon Johnson, a 4-star top 100 prospect, and Bryce Thornton, a 3-star who has received plenty of attention. Blake, let's end this by zooming out and looking at the whole picture. Florida now up to 22 2023 commitments. It's a class that is growing towards that maybe end of class size, just looking for a couple prize possessions to kind of round it out. What should fans expect from the Gators from here on through, let's say, early signing day in terms of who they might be pursuing and where things might go from here?
Well, I think at this point we have a pretty good idea what the blueprint looks like for Florida going forward. You look at linebacker, they're still kicking the tires on some guys out there, whether they're committed or not. I mentioned on the other one of our recent podcasts, I think we did earlier this week, that Malik Bryant, the Miami commit at linebacker, is someone they're still looking at. They're still bringing in different guys that are maybe more of a kind of diamond in the rough type of player at linebacker that they just want to see the frame. Obviously, you're watching a lot of film at this point, so I think that linebacker could be one area where they continue to stay active, looking at some of these guys, whether it's a flip of a guy like Malik Bryant. South Carolina commit Grayson Howard is a guy they still have a lot of interest in. They had a coach go by one of his high school games early this year. He seems locked in with South Carolina, but when you've got a guy that Florida wants, they're going to continue to try to just let it be known that he's still wanted. Defensive line, Cade McDonald, the 4-star defensive lineman, will make his decision on Halloween. He has Florida on his short list. There's plenty other defensive linemen. Xavier McLeod, he'll be on campus this weekend. He's a 4-star defensive lineman that's committed to South Carolina. 4-star defensive line commit John Walker, who is committed to UCF. He'll be on campus more than likely for an official visit to Florida at some point, maybe in December. Not something that's completely locked in, but Florida is still very active in recruiting him. Along the defensive line, you've got, James Smith, the 5-star defensive lineman who's coming in for an official visit this weekend. His teammate, Quay Rasal, the 5-star edge player. So Florida's still being very active with defensive linemen. I think, again, you've got a really good defensive line class that you've already put together. They still want to continue to keep their foot on the pedal. There's plenty of targets still left on the board. Some of those guys, for the most part, are committed to other schools, but Florida's still very active in recruiting them. Offensive line, Florida's still trying to flip 4-star interior offensive line Roger Kearney. There's a couple other offers that they have out there at this point too. So I think that as far as to answer your question, the big needs going forward that I think you're going to see Florida focus on: linebacker, defensive line, offensive line. Then obviously you've still got 5-star Cormani McClain out there in that defensive back class is, kind of the cherry on top of there. So there are a couple other areas. Florida can flip a 4-star running back, Cedric Baxter Jr. from Texas. They would not hesitate to do that whatsoever. He's a priority target for them. They've already got a commitment in 4-star Trayon Webb. So, it kind of depends on some positions, maybe the who rather than how many they take. If, again, like a guy like Cedric Baxter has a change of heart, wants to call Florida up, they wouldn't hesitate to take that commitment despite running back not being a huge need for them. But, linebacker, offensive line, defensive line, I think are probably the biggest needs for Florida going forward and where they're going to put most of their attention to going forward.
Well, Florida ranks number 8 right now in the country in 2023 recruiting with 22 commitments. It is going very well, I would say, for the new coaching staff in Gainesville as they try and round out what is looking like it's going to be a top 10 class in their first real year. So a solid start there. Keep it locked, though, on swamp247.com, where we have tons of recruiting news pretty much daily from Blake and the rest of the staff. And you can also go on over to swamp247.com for our coverage of Florida football, basketball, and baseball. We cover what's in-house as well as what might be in-house over at Swamp247. And with that, that's going to end this episode of Commit Breakdown. For Blake Alderman, my name is Jacob Rudner, and we'll see you on the next one.